Welcome in everybody to the 12th video in my 2024 Rookie Prospect Profile series. Today we're taking a look at my Rookie 2.02 in one quarterback leagues and 2.04 in Superflex leagues, my wide receiver 8 in the class, Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy, who I'll just get right to the point, is really only here because he's most likely going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft in just a couple of weeks. Taking a look at his college career, Worthy joined Texas in 2021 and had a breakout freshman season with nearly 1,000 receiving yards and 12 receiving touchdowns on 62 receptions, which broke Texas records for yards and touchdowns by a freshman wide receiver, and his 2.89 yards per team pass attempt is third best among first and second round selections since 2010, directly sandwiched between Juju Smith-Schuster and Julio Jones. Unfortunately, his 2022 sophomore season took a hit in production with the entrance of freshman quarterback Quinn Ewers. He was still the clear wide receiver 1 on the team, but only caught 60 passes for 760 yards and 9 touchdowns. So it was still a decent season, but definitely not up to par with his freshman year. And then in 2023, Ewers did improve, and Worthy was still the wide receiver 1 on the team in many ways, even with Addison Mitchell now in town, hauling in 75 passes for over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. So it was a career high year in receptions and yards, but a second straight season of a drop in touchdowns, which may or may not really matter overall. But let's dive into the analytics. And if you've watched these videos before, you may be familiar with my marker system, which is simply a series of checkboxes or baselines that I want players to hit based on what previously successful NFL players had coming out of college. And at the wide receiver position, I have 16 markers that are checking for various production and athleticism metrics with a final adjustment at the end based on draft capital. And currently, Xavier Worthy is grading out with 9 markers hit, which is actually tied for third in the class with Rome Odunze and Brian Thomas Jr. And then when he gets drafted, most likely on day 1, he would then go to 10 markers hit and join a group of past prospects like Treylon Burks, Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham Jr., Dez Bryant, Demaryius Thomas, and Roddy White. But actually, the crazy part for Worthy's analytical profile in this marker system is how close he was to hitting 2 more markers in best yards per team pass attempt and best fantasy points per game, both of which he was just shy on from that breakout freshman season in 2021. Had he managed to get just 50 more yards on just a couple more receptions, he would have hit both of those markers and been up to potentially 12 total markers after the NFL draft, which is where guys like Cortland Sutton, Devontae Adams, Michael Crabtree, Jordy Nelson, and Greg Jennings all were coming out of college. He is that close to that tier of prospects as a receiver coming out of Texas. So you may see the issue here that if he is that great of a prospect analytically, why does he slot in all the way down at wide receiver 8 in my rankings behind a few names that are grading out behind him? Well, a lot of that has to do with the type of receiver that he is, as well as some major red flags in his profile. For starters, he is your prototypical speedster receiver coming out of college, which makes complete sense from his record-breaking 4.21 40 at the NFL Combine. The issue with that is that when you're that much faster than everybody else on the field, you are only asked to beat defenses with your speed. The majority of Worthy's routes are 9 routes, post routes, or quick screens and slants to get into the ball in space, where he's either already run past every single defender by the time he gets the ball, or he has the ability to run past every single defender with the ball in his hands. He is most certainly not a physical receiver, again, which makes sense from his 165-pound frame. He's going to struggle with press coverage and more physical defensive backs that can knock him off of routes and bully him at the catch point. Where he does succeed are against smaller defensive backs that are more his size, and he has the ability to make highlight reel grabs over DBs with his 41-inch vertical. By all means, Worthy is an explosive and highly athletic playmaker, but he's an underdeveloped route runner, he is super thin, and he just doesn't project to being an X receiver in the NFL despite playing as an X receiver in college. You are honestly hoping that he can develop a bigger route tree to become a Deshaun Jackson type of a player or a Tyler Lockett type of a player who can make those big plays in the NFL, but also be a consistent option anywhere on the field. So on paper, his college production looks fantastic. I just am not certain that it's going to translate to the NFL. It's actually a question that I'm trying to answer with my new quote-unquote red flag metric that I've been working on this year, which is basically just a counter on a player's profile for potential issues. I actually cover this way more in detail in another video that I'm going to link right up here, but the TLDR of that video is that the success rate for receivers with 2 or more red flags is 4% among nearly 30 players drafted in the first 3 rounds since 2003. 4%. And Xavier Worthy has 3 red flags on his profile. It's 4.21 speed, his 23 BMI, and his best season was his freshman season. The hit rate for a sub 4.3 40 is 0. Literally no receivers ending the NFL with a sub 4.3 40 has ever produced. The hit rate for a sub 24 BMI is 1 out of 7 from the first 3 rounds. That one, of course, being Heisman Trophy winner Devonta Smith. Xavier Worthy is not Devonta Smith. He did not win the Heisman Trophy, not comparable. And the hit rate for best season is his freshman season is 33%, which is his best odds yet besides just being a first round pick, which is essentially a coin flip historically for NFL success. But the fun part about Xavier Worthy, though, is that he is most likely going to be a first-round pick. And if it happens to be to the Buffalo Bills, people are going to go nuts for him in the late first round in Superflex leagues, and it might even vault him up into the top 5 in one quarterback leagues. If that happens, I already know that I'm going to be out on Xavier Worthy. I would love to trade up or trade out of that pick to somebody else who's really excited for him at that spot, because Buffalo feels like the best case scenario for him to almost be able to replicate his usage at Texas, but with an actually elite quarterback, not Quinn Ewers. But I would not be surprised if Buffalo double dipped at the position in the draft this year. And depending on who that second receiver is that they take, I'll probably be more into drafting them later in rookie drafts than Xavier Worthy, kind of like a Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs kind of situation from the same draft class. Another team that I actually wouldn't mind taking Xavier Worthy is the Arizona Cardinals in the late first round if they also decide to double dip and draft Marvin Harrison at 4 and then Xavier Worthy at 27. I would actually argue that that situation would be better for Worthy than being the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo, because it would place him in a better role on an offense for the type of player that he is, a much more wide receiver 2 who wouldn't have to worry about double coverage and can take advantage of a defense's second quarterback. This might also work for Marvin Harrison as well, because he could probably get doubled less if defenses worry about Xavier Worthy's speed. I mean, who are you going to double? Marvin Harrison Jr. or the guy with 4.2 speed? You kind of sound screwed either way, and that could be beneficial to everybody involved on that offense, including Trey McBride. I think the Cowboys also make a lot of sense to me in a very similar way, and maybe Worthy can learn a thing or two from Brandon Cooks about developing a larger route tree, being a bit more physical, so that when Brandon Cooks moves on, Xavier Worthy is now the wide receiver 2 across from Lamb, and we're just kind of back in that same situation that I mentioned with Arizona, where defenses now have to think about who to put safety help on, CeeDee Lamb or the 4.2 speedster. That could work out pretty well in Dallas as well, too. And then, of course, there's always Kansas City, the team that's been desperate to find a vertical threat since trading away Tyreek Hill, and they can solve all of those issues with Xavier Worthy. And again, put him in an offensive role more conducive to the type of player that he is. Honestly, on the Chiefs, it kind of sounds like a blend of all the situations of teams we talked about before, where you give him the elite quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. You add some on-the-job training from Hollywood Brown and maybe Travis Kelce as well. You add in a situation where defenses can't focus on him alone or get beat by somebody else, and all of that just equals some massive potential for fantasy points. So at the end of the day, the real story for me and Xavier Worthy is just going to come down to his ADP after the draft. Does he get propped up more as a top 5-ish kind of wide receiver from a good landing spot? Or does his value kind of stay where it is right now, despite still landing in a good landing spot, to where his cost is actually a little bit more swallowable if he does actually end up busting? I don't want to draft him in the first round. I mean, maybe the 112 in Superflex leagues, but ideally the early second is a much more manageable price for him, in my opinion. If his ADP is not there in that early second round, then I'm just going to draft whoever falls after him. But if he is there, then I'll be willing to take the shot on a guy that I think could become a solid NFL wide receiver, but honestly might just become one of those guys that is better for NFL than he is for fantasy.